Maybe you can't explain why you clicked here. Maybe it was the title, or just that strange feeling that something inside you asked for this moment. It's as if the universe has gently nudged you to this point, and now all you need to do is breathe and listen. Because what we're going to talk about here isn't about the other person, it's about you, about your power to overcome anyone, not with words, not with confrontation, but with silence. Have you ever noticed how uncomfortable silence is? How it disarms, reveals, and lays bare truths that 1,000 explanations can't touch? There's a silent force within you that may have been forgotten, a force that doesn't need to be proven, convinced, or reacted to. And this video is about rediscovering that force. Stay with me, because maybe this is the reminder you needed to finally break free. Think about it. How many times have you explained yourself, defended yourself, tried to show that you weren't the villain of the story? How many times have you spent your energy trying to repair perceptions, sustain bonds, maintain a peace that only existed if you remained silent? But not in silence, but in submission. There's a profound difference between the silence of weakness and the silence of consciousness. Osho said that true silence isn't absence, it's total presence. It's the state where you don't run away, but also don't lose yourself trying to be heard by those who never wanted to listen. The silent path is not about disappearing. It's about appear in full, when you no longer need to react to prove you're alive. When you understand that power lies not in the response but in the pause, and it is precisely in this pause that many collapse, because it is in this pause that everything that was false begins to crumble. Maybe you're experiencing this right now. That feeling of exhaustion, of speaking and not being understood, of trying and still being accused. Silence arrives not as a resignation, but as a gateway, a point where you decide to stop wasting energy trying to change others and start changing yourself. It's at this point that silence becomes your most powerful weapon, and I know the world isn't used to this. We live in a noisy age where everyone wants to have the last word, where noise seems like proof of power. But Osho taught something that most fear to hear. True power arises when you no longer need to win arguments to be at peace. Silence is the language of the awakened soul. It does not humiliate, it reveals. It does not escape, it transcends. How many times have you felt that by remaining silent you were losing? And how many of those times over time did you realize that that silence said it all? Osho used to say that silence is the highest form of response. Because in it there is no defense, no attack, there is only clarity. And it is from this clarity that true overcoming is born. Overcoming someone isn't about winning, it's about no longer being a hostage, and that only happens when you understand that peace is worth more than pride. That inner stillness is worth more than any explanation. The mind wants to retaliate, wants to prove, wants to show who's right. But conscience just watches. It smiles. It understands that nothing needs to be fixed outside when everything has already been resolved inside. So maybe the silence you've been feeling lately isn't a punishment. It's a call, an invitation from your soul to step away from the noise, the arguments, the excuses, to stop begging for understanding and start choosing presence. Because in the end, those who understand your silence understand you completely. And those who don't understand would never hear you, even if you screamed. While the world teaches you to react, Osho invites you to observe, because silence is not emptiness, it is space. It is in it that you rediscover yourself, strengthen yourself, and free yourself. The silent path is solitary, yes, but it is in it that you discover you were never alone. So, if this video reached you today, it's because there's something inside you ready to awaken. Something that's tired of explaining, justifying itself, trying, something that just wants to be. And maybe, just maybe, what you call loss is the beginning of your liberation. Stay with me. In the next few minutes, I want to show you what Osho really meant when he taught that silence is the bridge between suffering and freedom. The silent path isn't about forgetting someone, it's about remembering who you are when the noise stops. If what I've said so far has touched you, write in the comments, "I choose silence as my path." This phrase is more than a comment. It's a commitment to your own peace. If something inside you felt this calling, leave your like right now. This isn't just support, it's a symbolic gesture. You telling yourself that you're ready to follow this silent path of strength and awareness. And if you're not part of this journey yet, subscribe to the channel. Here, each video is a step in this process of awakening and reconnecting with your true self. Silence is not the end, it's the beginning of your freedom. And what comes next, will show you how to transform that silence into power. Have you noticed that sometimes silence hurts more than any word, especially when it's your own? This is a pain few can admit. The pain of having given your all, of having explained yourself 1,000 times, of having sought understanding in places that only knew how to demand more. It's the kind of pain that makes no noise, but corrodes from within. You gave too much of yourself, tried to maintain relationships that were already empty, sustained conversations that no longer had any soul. And deep down, you knew. You knew your presence was needed, but not appreciated, that your effort was noticed, but never reciprocated. And yet you stayed, because the fear of silence seemed greater than the weight of loneliness. You spoke, explained, tried to be understood. You tried to demonstrate your intentions, justify your limitations, prove you weren't what others said you were, but nothing changed. It was as if your words fell into an abyss, a distant echo that returned distorted, making you doubt your own lucidity. And then you began to realize it's not that you weren't clear, it's that some people don't want to hear what forces them to change. No one listens to what they're not yet ready to hear. And this realization hurts, because it shows that for too long, you expected emotional maturity from someone who only knew how to react, not reflect. Osho said, "When you insist on being heard, you are trapped in the need for validation. Silence is the beginning of freedom." This phrase accurately sums up the point your soul reaches when it tires of justifying itself. Because every attempt to explain what you feel is, without realizing it, an attempt to convince the other that your worth depends on their approval. And that's precisely where imprisonment arises. Osho called this one of the greatest human mistakes, believing that truth needs to be defended. Truth, he said, simply is, and silence is its home. But how can you accept silence when everything inside you still screams? How can you not respond when your instincts demand a reaction? The mind wants to prove itself, wants to be recognized, wants to correct injustice. But consciousness observes. It knows that reacting is remaining trapped in the cycle, and that silence is the only act that truly breaks the pattern. You begin to notice that the more you speak, the less you are heard, and the more you remain silent, the more the world reveals what it truly is. Silence becomes a mirror. It doesn't change the other, but it shows who the other has always been. The pain of remaining silent is intense at first, because it feels like you're losing ground. It seems that by not responding, you're accepting the disrespect, as if you're becoming smaller. But after a while you understand. Silence isn't giving up. It's discernment. It's the moment you choose not to feed the game. It's the pause that interrupts the emotional manipulation and gives you back the power over your own energy. Osho explained that conscious silence is a form of inner revolution, because it's where you step out of the victim role and become a witness. When you witness what happens without reacting, the pain no longer dominates you, it simply passes. And that's where the silent path begins to make sense. It teaches you that not every separation is a loss, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is simply not insisting. You begin to understand that the other person doesn't hurt you because they're cruel, but because you allow your expectations to exceed reality. Silence is the medicine that dissolves illusion. It exposes attachment, the need for control, the addiction to approval. And when that illusion falls, what remains is what was always there, you whole even without being understood. Osho said that most people live in fear of emptiness, and so they chase noise, conversations, distractions, conflicts, anything that prevents them from hearing themselves. But silence is not absence, it is space, and in this space, all that is true flourishes. You begin to realize that the pain you felt at not being heard was actually the call of your own inner voice, trying to manifest itself. That discomfort that once felt like punishment was merely an invitation to look within and see what you had been ignoring. There's nothing more transformative than recognizing that silence is a choice, not a punishment. It's the point at which you stop trying to control how others see you and start caring about how you feel. You realize that your peace doesn't depend on explanations, but on awareness. And that true overcoming isn't about proving anything, it's about no longer needing to prove it. When you understand this, something changes. The weight of words loses its importance, automatic reactions cease, and what was once chaos begins to become stillness. The silent path is not cold, it is wise. It is the path of those who understand that strength lies not in winning arguments, but in not being dragged into them. Osho said that when silence enters, the false disappears by itself, and perhaps that is what is happening to you now. What is crumbling is not your world, but your old way of reacting. It is the ego that screams because it cannot exist without conflict. But the soul remains serene, observing. You may still feel the urge to explain, to send one last message, to try to mend what's broken, but observe this impulse with care. It's just your mind resisting transformation. When you truly choose silence, you'll see that nothing needs to be said. The answers will come on their own, and time will reveal what discussion could never reveal. If you are living this moment, if you feel this need to be silent to find yourself again, write in the comments. Silence is also an answer. This phrase is a reminder that you haven't lost anything. You've just freed yourself from what no longer serves you. Protecting your energy isn't selfishness, it's spiritual intelligence. This is perhaps one of the hardest lessons to accept, especially for those who have been conditioned to believe that love must be proven, that kindness demands sacrifice, and that turning away is synonymous with coldness. From an early age, you were taught to put others first, to always understand, to forgive even before being asked, to remain calm when everything inside screamed, and little by little, without realizing it, you confused patience with passivity, empathy with self-abandonment, until silence arrived. Not the silence of fear, but what Osho called total presence. The silence that doesn't run away but observes, that doesn't ignore but understands, that doesn't turn away out of resentment but out of awareness. Osho said that silence is not absence, it is total presence. When you choose to be silent, you are not disappearing, you are becoming whole again. It's as if withdrawing is the most profound way to return to center, to gather the pieces that have been lost in explanations, justifications, efforts to maintain connections that only existed when you diminished yourself. This understanding changes everything. Because silence, when born of awareness, is not a wall, it is a sanctuary, and it is within it that you begin to understand that you owe nothing to anyone but your own peace. Perhaps you still harbor guilt, the guilt of not responding anymore, of not pursuing, of not trying to explain again, the guilt of being misunderstood, of being called cold, distant, or insensitive. But guilt is a trick of the conditioned mind. It traps you in the cycle of emotional dependence, convincing you that choosing yourself is wrong. Osho said that true love is born of freedom, not obligation, and freedom requires space. Sometimes that space is silence. It's natural to feel uncomfortable when you start protecting yourself. The world is accustomed to your availability, your readiness, your automatic yes. When you change, those who used to feed off your energy become uncomfortable. People who have always had access to your time and emotions find your new state of stillness strange. They mistake your peace for rejection because they've lost the habit of dealing with someone who no longer needs to react to exist. But this discomfort is a sign that you're on the right path. When you disturb with silence, it's because you've finally become inaccessible to chaos. Silence is a spiritual filter. It separates what is true from what was merely need disguised as love. When you remain silent, you observe who stays without responding, who respects your space and who only seeks you out of convenience. Osho said that silence reveals the invisible. It reveals intentions, unmasks affections, purifies connections. It is the fire that burns away the inessential. And yes, sometimes this fire hurts, but it is a pain that liberates. You don't need to explain yourself to those who feed on your guilt. You don't need to justify your absence to those who never respected your presence. There's a kind of strength that only arises when you stop trying to be understood. And this strength grows in silence. Osho taught that the mind screams, but consciousness whispers, and it's in this whisper that clarity emerges. When the noise of need dissolves, what remains is a quiet presence, the kind of presence that doesn't need to be noticed to exist. You begin to realize that silence is the true language of the awakened. Words are limited, shaped by wounds and memories. Silence is not. Silence speaks the language of the soul. It communicates what cannot be said, transmits an energy that those who feel it understand. And when you begin to live from this state, You realize that nothing else needs to be proven. People can interpret you however they want. The world can label you as distant, but you know you are simply respecting yourself. Osho said that the unconscious seeks noise to feel alive, while the awakened seeks silence to avoid losing themselves. This is the difference between reacting and observing, between depending and being. When you begin to withdraw, you realize that your energy has value, that your attention is precious, and so you begin to distribute it wisely, not out of coldness, but out of love, the kind of love that begins within you and overflows without demanding anything in return. Protecting your energy is an act of spiritual love. It's recognizing that what you feel is sacred and that not everyone deserves access to it. It's understanding that silence is an invisible shield against the emotional chaos of others. Osho said that people who live unconsciously will try to drag you into their same state, and that the real challenge is to remain at peace even when everything around you wants to provoke a reaction. This is the test of consciousness, being able to choose silence even when the mind wants war. But be careful. True silence isn't the kind that hardens, it's the kind that heals. It's not revenge, it's protection. It's not arrogance, it's wisdom. There's a difference between remaining silent out of fear and remaining silent out of clarity. The former imprisons you, the latter liberates you, and it's from this freedom that your inner strength is born. You stop wasting energy trying to change others and start caring for your energy field, your emotions, your thoughts, and suddenly, what once drained you no longer affects you. Osho called this state silent witness, the point where you observe without becoming confused with what you observe. And in this state, you begin to feel something new, peace without reason, a serenity that doesn't depend on answers, validation, or reconciliation. It's the peace of someone who has chosen themselves, of someone who has understood that protecting their own energy is the first step to reconnecting with the divine within, because silence, deep down, is the voice of God in the form of a pause. If you understood what this message awakens in you, if something inside you recognized this truth, write it in the comments. My silence protects me. This phrase is more than a gesture, it's an anchor, a reminder that your energy is sacred, and that silence, when born of love, is the purest form of presence. There comes a moment on the path of silence when everything begins to make sense. It's when you realize that what was holding you back wasn't the other person's lack of words, but your own predictability. Osho said that the conditioned mind loves patterns, and that it is through these patterns that it feels secure, even if the price of that security is your peace. When you always react the same way, the other person knows exactly how to reach you, how to manipulate you, how to control you. It's a silent dance of stimulus and response, where you believe you're in control, but in reality, you're just repeating the same cycle. Silence breaks this cycle. It deconstructs the game. And that's why so many people fear your silence, because it reveals what was hidden. Think about how many times you've been predictable. When someone provoked you, and you responded exactly as expected. When someone walked away and you ran after them. When they blamed you, and you tried to explain yourself. Each of these reactions fed the pattern. Osho explained that the mind always seeks repetition, because it is in repetition that the ego survives. Silence is dangerous for those who live in control because it interrupts the script. Suddenly you don't react, you don't explain, you don't defend yourself, and the other person doesn't know what to do with it. Control dissolves and power changes hands. But silence isn't just a lack of response, it's an internal shift. It takes you out of the emotional puppet role and puts you in the witness's place. And the witness observes but doesn't get involved. The witness feels but doesn't get lost. This is what Osho called dissolving the pattern. Because when you observe the cycle without feeding it, it simply starves. Silence is what closes what noise could never resolve. Guilt is the second gear that keeps you trapped. It's the emotional link the other uses to pull you back into the game. Guilt tells you to explain that you need to be understood, that walking away is a lack of love. But Osho said that conscious love never demands sacrifice. Guilt is a remnant of the conditioned mind, trained to believe that peace is only valid if the other person is okay with your choices. And this is where the turning point happens, when you understand that your spiritual freedom doesn't depend on pleasing anyone. Understand how guilt works stealthily. It disguises itself as empathy, responsibility, and conscience. It makes you believe you're a good person when you suffer for others' pain. But in reality, it keeps you trapped in the need to control others' perceptions. You want to be seen as good, as fair, as consistent. And it's precisely this need for recognition that drains your energy. When you finally shut up, you're not denying empathy. You're freeing yourself from the burden of carrying what isn't yours. Silence is the antidote to guilt. It teaches you that true love needs no justification. The third break is the most profound. Silence disarms the other's narrative. Every manipulator, conscious or not, needs a response to continue the game. They need you to react, explain yourself, defend yourself, because that's the energy they feed on. When you don't respond, the script falls apart. And what remains is emptiness. The same emptiness the other must now face within themselves. Osho said that silence is the mirror of truth. It doesn't reflect what the other says. It reflects what the other is. And that's why your silence is so disturbing. It forces the other to see themselves. Silence is revolutionary because it breaks with the ancestral habit of trying to be right. The human mind wants to win, wants to convince, wants to explain, but consciousness only wants to understand. When you choose silence, you are saying to life, I no longer want to win, I want to understand. And understanding at this level is transcendence. Osho taught that true wisdom begins when you no longer feel the need to defend yourself, because who you are, in essence, cannot be attacked. It's curious how silence even changes the vibration of the environment. Situations that once generated chaos begin to lose strength. People realize they can no longer reach you as they once did. The energy cycle breaks. The field shifts. Osho said that the energy of silence is magnetic, but at the same time, protective. It attracts what is pure and repels what is dense. That's why when you choose this path, some people naturally move away. Not because you've driven them away, but because they no longer resonate within you. The game is over, and silence has been checkmated. But be careful. Silence is not repression. It's not silencing feelings. It's understanding them before transforming them into words. When you silence your mind, your heart begins to speak, and the heart's voice is always peaceful. It doesn't need to prove anything, just express what's real. Osho said that words are like leaves, but silence is the root. Without roots, everything said falls with the first breeze. So, before speaking, return to the root. Observe the impulse, feel what it carries, and decide if it's worth breaking your peace for a response. Silence is the end of emotional manipulation because it is the beginning of awareness. Predictability dissolves, guilt loses its power, and the other person's narrative crumbles. All this happens not because you fight, but because you stop fighting. Osho said that the ego needs resistance to survive. When you don't offer resistance, the ego collapses for lack of conflict. It's the paradox of awakening. You win when you don't try to win. And the more you practice this state, the more you realize that silence isn't emptiness, it's fullness. It gives you back the time, energy, and power that were trapped in pointless arguments. It creates space for what's true to flourish. And in this space, a new perception emerges, that there's nothing to prove, no one to convince, and no noise capable of threatening what's real. If you felt this truth move within you, if you realized that part of your pain came from the need to respond, write in the comments, I choose conscious silence. This phrase is a declaration to oneself, a reminder that true strength lies in those who can remain at peace, even when everything around them screams for reaction. For the next 48 hours, don't explain yourself to anyone. Just observe. It sounds simple, but this is the kind of practice that changes everything. Conscious silence is not the absence of action, it is the deepest form of presence. Osho said, when silence arrives, the false disappears by itself. And that's exactly what happens when you decide to stop reacting, because the whole world is used to seeing you trying to prove something, trying to maintain an image, trying to justify feelings. But silence breaks that need. When you choose not to explain yourself, you are saying to the universe, I trust who I am even if no one understands. This is your challenge. For the next 48 hours, practice what I call the conscious silence challenge. Whenever someone says something that would normally trigger your reaction, pause. Take a deep breath. Count to 10 in your head. Notice what your body feels. Notice what your mind creates. Don't respond immediately. Don't defend yourself. Don't argue. Just be there, present, observing. It's in this space between impulse and response that awareness is born. And awareness is what transforms noise into wisdom. You'll notice how your mind fights against this. It will try to convince you that silence is weakness, that you're losing ground, that you need to say something to protect yourself. But remember, this is the voice of the old pattern. It's the echo of the need to be understood, to be accepted, to be right. Osho said, "The mind is the noise of the past." And as long as you listen to this mind, you'll keep repeating the same cycles. Silence, on the other hand, is the sound of the now. It's the radical break with conditioning, the moment you stop living by reflex and start living by choice. Notice what happens when you don't react. People find it strange. They're bothered by your serenity. They try to force a conflict. They look for any way to pull you away from your center. This happens because, in a way, your silence exposes what's unbalanced in the other person. It shows how much their control depended on your response. And the more you remain calm, the more the game loses steam. Osho called this the power of non-reaction. It's when the other person releases the energy of provocation, and it finds no return. It vanishes into thin air. This is the point where silence becomes a shield, but not a shield of resistance, but of awareness. You're not shutting yourself down, you're preserving yourself. You're not running away, you're centering yourself. And the most beautiful thing is, when you enter this state, you begin to realize that you no longer need to fight for respect. Respect arises naturally because your energy field changes. The presence of someone who has found peace speaks louder than any explanation. During these 48 hours, you'll discover how exhausting reacting was. You'll notice how the simple act of justifying yourself drained you. You'll realize how accustomed you were to explaining yourself, even in situations that didn't require explanation. "I'm sorry if I bothered you. I just wanted to help. I didn't mean to." These are all micro ways of asking for permission to exist, and silence is the antidote that dissolves this habit. When you stop explaining yourself, you give yourself permission to be. Osho said that the greatest freedom is to live without the need for approval. And that's what the challenge of conscious silence teaches you, to live without needing to be understood. What's real in you doesn't need to be defended. What's true remains, what's false disappears. You'll see that many of the situations that used to rob you of peace resolve themselves when you don't fuel the argument, because conflict most of the time is just an attempt to keep alive an energy that should have already died. At first, it may be uncomfortable. Your mind will scream, your body will want to act, and the silence will feel heavy, but trust me, this is the process of emotional detoxification. You are cleansing your energetic system of the automatic reactions that kept you stuck. Osho said that the mind is a rebellious servant. If you observe it in silence, it tries to provoke you with thoughts and memories. But if you continue observing without fighting, it tires. And when the mind tires, presence arises. It is in that moment that you feel the lightness of the now. In moments when the urge to respond is almost irresistible, mentally repeat the anchor phrase, "Today, I choose not to react." Let it become your mantra during this challenge. You'll notice that the more you choose silence, the more your energy reorganizes. Emotions lose their control over you and begin to dissolve naturally. Osho said that silence is the invisible teacher. It teaches without words, heals without effort, and transforms without violence. And as you practice, something extraordinary happens. External situations begin to change. People who once pressured you begin to respect your space. Conversations that once drained you cease to occur. Chaos fades, and you realize that the world responds to your inner vibration. Osho said that silence doesn't change others, it changes you. And that's enough to change everything around you. So, for these 48 hours, try living without explanations. If someone questions you, just smile. If someone provokes you, just observe. If something bothers you, breathe. You don't need to participate in all the drama they invite you into. Silence is your choice to no longer engage in battles that don't concern you. And it's at this point that you'll understand what Osho meant when he said, "When silence arrives, the false disappears by itself." If this challenge resonates with you, if something inside you recognizes that it's time to stop reacting and start observing, write in the comments, "Today I choose not to react." This phrase is your gateway to a new state of consciousness, a reminder that peace is not achieved, it is chosen, one silence at a time. Silence is not distance, it is maturity. It is the point where you understand that you can love someone and still preserve yourself. It is when consciousness awakens to the balance between presence and limits, between compassion and lucidity. Osho said that compassion without awareness becomes attachment, and awareness without compassion becomes hardness. And it is in this fine line between these two extremes that spiritual wisdom resides. The silence that heals is not the one that closes itself off from the world, but the one that opens itself to itself. It is a silence that embraces, that observes, that understands, without dissolving into the other. For a long time, we've been taught that true love requires total surrender, that loving means being always available, even when it costs us peace. But this distorted idea of love is one of the biggest causes of emotional exhaustion. Osho said that conscious love is like the wind. It touches, refreshes, but doesn't imprison. And when you understand this, you realize that silence isn't the end of connection. It's the beginning of a purer connection, one that doesn't depend on the need to constantly explain, prove, or respond. Silence, when born of awareness, is not an escape from coexistence. It is a new kind of presence. You remain there, but in a different way. You are no longer in the role of one who reacts, but of one who understands. It is the state in which love ceases to be an exchange of energy and becomes an emanation. You don't give what you have, you share what you are. Osho said that true spiritual maturity is when you can be with another without losing your center. And silence is the tool that keeps you centered. The world confuses silence with indifference because it's accustomed to emotional noise. But true silence is the opposite. It doesn't deny love, it purifies it. It removes the excess, the demands, the drama, the fear. It leaves only what's essential. When you love in silence, love becomes lighter, deeper, more real. Because it doesn't try to possess, it simply contemplates. And those who learn to contemplate discover a kind of love that doesn't get sick. It's important to understand that silence doesn't have to be interpreted as coldness. Osho said there's a difference between being silent out of absence and being silent out of plenitude. The former is empty. The latter is full of understanding. Mature silence is full of presence. It observes without judgment, welcomes without needing to interfere, and respects the timing of things. It is the antidote to anxious love, the kind that seeks quick answers and immediate certainties. You can continue to love, but now consciously. You can continue to be kind without being used. You can continue to be present without being dependent. Silence gives you the freedom to be with someone without having to lose yourself to do so. It's the space where love and individuality coexist. Osho said that to truly love is to allow the other person to exist as they are, without trying to mold them to your expectations. And silence is the highest form of respect you can offer someone. Permission to be. When you enter this state, you begin to realize that you no longer need to chase after those who don't want to stay. You understand that some people only know how to love in noise, and that your silence disorients them. But that's not your fault. Your role isn't to be understood, it's to be true. Conscious love doesn't try to convince anyone to stay. It simply remains true to itself. Osho said that compassion arises when you see another's suffering without becoming part of it. And this requires spiritual maturity. It's looking at the other and silently saying, I understand you, but I won't waste myself trying to save you. This is the love that liberates, the love that respects, the love that observes without imprisoning itself. Most people don't understand this because they confuse compassion with condescension. But true compassion doesn't feed another's unconsciousness. It mirrors it. It shows through the example of silence that there is another way to live, a way that doesn't need noise to exist. Silence is also generous. It gives others space to recognize their own mistakes without you having to point them out. It creates the necessary environment for reflection. Osho said that nothing transforms as much as being left alone by someone you expected to react. Silence is the presence that teaches without words. And sometimes the greatest act of love is precisely not interfering. But be careful. Mature silence is not the same as isolation. It doesn't close doors. It simply removes expectations of return. It's not an absence of communication. It's a deeper communication, made of vibration, intention, and energy. You speak without speaking, and whoever is in tune will understand. This is the kind of language that transcends the ego and reaches the soul. You'll realize that silence, when used consciously, doesn't separate you from the world. It connects you with it in a different way. Coexistence ceases to be tiring. Interactions become lighter. You learn to be present without carrying the emotional weight of others. And the more you live in this state, the more you realize that true love is silent. It doesn't need to prove itself. It doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to promise anything. It just is. Osho said that love is the fragrance of inner silence. This phrase sums up the balance you seek. When there is silence within you, the love that arises is pure, free, and compassionate. And when there is true love, silence ceases to be loneliness and becomes communion. Loving consciously is this: remaining open but not vulnerable, remaining sensitive but not fragile, remaining present but without losing peace. The path of silence doesn't separate you from others. It teaches you how to relate without hurting yourself. It shows you that love without awareness is attachment, and detachment without love is coldness. Balance lies between the two. It's the point where heart and mind meet, where love and limits coexist in harmony. Osho said that the awakened being is one who loves freely and distances themselves with love. This is the essence of mature silence: being available without being drained, being present without losing oneself. If what I've said so far resonated within you, if some part of your soul understood that silence and love are not opposites, write in the comments, "Silence keeps me at peace." This phrase is a reminder that true love is born from calm, and that protecting your peace is the deepest way to continue loving consciously. When you stop explaining yourself, the world finally hears what your silence has to say. This is the turning point. Because true overcoming never happens amidst noise. It happens when you find within yourself a place where nothing else needs to be proven. Osho said that silence is the voice of existence, and it is in this state that you realize you no longer need to fight for space, nor justify yourself for being who you are. You don't overcome anyone by arguing, competing, or trying to win. You overcome when silence makes you untouchable. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you is ready for this new cycle. You stayed until the end of a video that talks about spiritual maturity, self-mastery, and the power of silence. And this already shows that your consciousness is awakening to something greater. So, I want to extend an invitation to you. Subscribe to the channel now. Not just to watch the next video, but to continue this journey of inner expansion. Each piece of content here is a piece of this journey, the journey of those who have chosen peace, of those who have understood that silence is also an answer. And if this video resonated with what you are experiencing right now, leave your like. It's a small gesture, but it's also a silent commitment to your own evolution. It's you telling yourself, "I am ready to live in peace," without needing noise to feel whole. Now stay with me. The next video appearing here on the screen is a direct continuation of this conversation. Click and come with me, because your silent path is just beginning.